Hello, welcome to JURIST. This video has been produced by JURIST India staff. Today I, Khushali Mahajan, would be interviewing Professor Philip Bobbitt. He is a distinguished senior lecturer at the University of Texas in Austin, and in his long career, he has made considerable contributions to constitutional law and theory and the laws of war. Welcome, Professor. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Very happy to be here. Thank you for asking me.
On behalf of JURIST, I would like to congratulate you on receiving the honor of a knighthood. You've been a true inspiration to many of us over the world.
What a kind thing to say. That's almost as nice as getting the honor. Thank you.
So in today's world, what we see is that your book, Shields of Achilles, has become ever more relevant, especially looking at the situation in Afghanistan right now. So one of the most poignant quotes from the book was, "War is not mythology. War is a natural condition of the state." So putting this into the perspective of what's happening in Afghanistan right now, would you consider Taliban's takeover of control over Kabul a true example of what you have been trying to say through this quote?
Partly. I would say the events in Afghanistan are strong evidence that what I have said about war in this book has been completely ignored. And here's what I mean. For many years, I used to give the introductory lecture at the National Defense University to a large group of colonels and generals, many of them from abroad. And at one point in the lecture, I would say, if you think that victory is the defeat of the enemy in battle, raise your hand. And of course, most of them would all raise their hand. And I would say, no, that's victory in football, but that's not victory in warfare. Victory in warfare is the achievement of the war aim. And sometimes you can lose in the battlefield and still win the war. And other times, as the Americans learned in Vietnam, you can wreak a tremendous amount of damage on the enemy in battle, really never lose a single significant engagement, and still lose the war. So that's the first thing I think that, at least here in the States, has made no impression. We still think that warfare has a certain model. It's a warfare of annihilation or at best attrition. And if it doesn't fit that model, it's not warfare. And if you don't have a surrender on the deck of a cruiser, it's not victory. The second thing I'd say is that warfare itself, however, even if this concept of the meaning of warfare is the same, warfare is changing. And it's a bitter paradox that just about the time the Americans had finally developed a set of tactics and support organizations to keep the Taliban at bay, President Trump yanked the rug out from the entire project. I think this will have not only a negative impact in Afghanistan, but also in Pakistan. And although I know we're recording this for JURIST and the University of Pittsburgh, I can't help but think that the Indian government is looking at what's happening in Afghanistan with a tremendous amount of concern.
Definitely, most definitely.
And all it can do is write and speak. But the hardest thing to do is to get people to think along new lines. It's even the commentary, whether it's in favor or hostile to the Biden administration, is just a retread of the same old empty arguments that are all mired in this very narrow view of what victory and what warfare really constitute.
Definitely. So, in this spectrum of war, where does terrorism fit in? Is it the same as war? Is it different from war?
Well, it's a fascinating question, and a question that I would answer differently today than my father would have answered 50 years ago. Warfare tracks the constitutional order of states. Feudal realms had a different kind of warfare because they were fighting for different war aims. And if you think that states like India or the United States, China or France or Britain, if you think they have the same constitutional order as the early European states did in the 17th century, think, well, the nation state emerged in Westphalia, we live in nation states, no difference. Then you're going to have a hard time accounting for the changes in the objectives and war aims of warfare. I think it's more productive and realistic to see that we've had deep changes in the constitutional order of states since the 16th century, and that the kinds of war aims that states pursue when they are imperial states, as dominated the 19th century, or industrial nation states, which dominated the 20th century, are really quite different, and therefore warfare is different. It makes no sense to talk about a war on terrorism, much less a war on terror, if you are an industrial nation state fighting another industrial nation state. Terrorism for those states were typically wars of national liberation, they were anti-colonial wars, they were sectarian separatist wars, uh, as we saw in Sri Lanka, uh, uh, or in Ireland, or in the Basque region in Spain, or in Algeria. Uh, those were terrorist tactics, but they did not amount to warfare. Someone was trying to seize a state, the way the Taliban have seized Kabul, to spread their ideology over some defined state territory. What's new is the rise of a constitutional order I think of as informational market states, states that use the market to achieve their objectives. And you see this in many, many modern states now. The struggle between the US and China over cybersecurity is could be exhibit A, but there's so many others. That kind of state, when it faces a transnational, global network of terrorism, really can fight a war, a real war with real troops and real declarations and real tactics. That is not a police action. It's not a law enforcement problem. It is a global war. And the struggle that the United States and her allies face against Al Qaeda, for example, is that kind of a struggle. Now, let me immediately say, I don't mean that militant or radical Islam is the paradigm here. It happens that Islam is a global religion. So there were the uh, uh, individuals and groups, the leaders and the communications in place for a global network in the most radical sections of Islam. But uh, it could be climate change radicals. It could be some other religious sect. It, the only necessary factor is that there be a transnational goal and a transnational network pursuing that war aim. So that's a long way of saying, yes, I think it does make sense in 2021 to talk about a war, a genuine war prosecuted by a state against a group that is not a state actor.
Oh, definitely. So, would you consider state to be a continuous institution? What we
To
see in
be a, I'm
to
sorry,
be a to be a continuous institution. What we see in Afghanistan, that the takeover by Taliban, it's actually they have taken over a state. Now the state still exists, but
yes.
through different means. Uh, so while the country was occupied, while there was war in the country, and now we see what is recognized as a terrorist organization by most of the uh, governments across the globe.
Yeah.
So state is still there, but the control is by people of different ideologies. So what I'm trying to say here is that if a terrorist organization does take control over a state, will it be recognized as a state anymore, or will it be a government of a stateless people?
It's a fascinating question that has bedeviled international law for a long time. When the Bolsheviks took over the Russian state, there was a substantial question as to whether or not the treaties that had bound the Tsarist regime now bound the Bolsheviks. Uh, by the same token, when the Communist Party faded and the Soviet Union broke up, there was another question. Do the arms control treaties that bound the Soviet Union bind the new Russian state? Uh, and the answer that was given at that time was yes and no. There are some treaties that persist, and others that were unique to the Soviet Union that don't persist. My guess is that the Taliban state, although it'll face some headwinds in terms of recognition by uh, many states, will be recognized by a number of leading states, and that it will be a state. It'll be run by terrorists. You're right about that. Uh, but North Korea is run by a terror family, and we think of it as a state.
Definitely, definitely. So, in a world where war is completely unavoidable, where do institutions promoting peace and amnesty stand?
I think they have a wide variety of roles. Partly, their role is simply to inspire peace movements, transnational peace movements to end conflict. Uh, this has been productive in many parts of the world, uh, and that agitation for peace is something we want to preserve. We don't want to try to snuff out, even if you think war is ultimately ineradicable. The second role for organizations of peace is to try to develop a realistic view of war, because peace is something more than just the absence of war. You can imagine a terror state in which there's no warfare and indeed no domestic violence because the suppression is so authoritarian, so tyrannical. The, one of the conditions for true peace is, I think, the uh, robust maintenance of military forces. That, that sounds paradoxical. In the early part of the 20th century, many people thought that if you have an army, you're going to have a war because these guys want something to do. But I don't think that really is an apt description today. In my little neighborhood here in Austin, uh, I would see signs in people's yards, and they would say, "End warfare in Iraq. Bring U.S. troops home." And um, that seemed silly to me. Uh, you might end the threat to U.S. troops if you brought U.S. troops home, but that you
Mm.
would end warfare, end the chaos, this sectarian violence between Shia and Sunni in different regions in Iraq, and different ethnic as well as religious groups in conflict, was just absurd. Uh, Now, the Americans may have done good or harm, or more harm than good, or more good than harm, but it is silly to think that simply by withdrawing from a conflict, you end war. Sometimes, yes. Uh, we'll see what happens in Afghanistan. My guess is that conflict in Afghanistan is about to get a good deal more inflammatory,
Mm.
but we'll see.
Do you think that will lead to another occupation of Afghanistan? Because definitely there's going to be internal conflicts as there
I
were
think
already.
I think so. I think so. And the suppression that I think the Taliban has in mind is going to get pushback from groups that have now tasted what it's like to organize educational systems and a labor force along lines that the Taliban abhor and wish to eradicate.
Um, but with regard to what we saw happen in Afghanistan, now that we see that Taliban has taken over, would you consider the 20-year-long presence of the United States a failure?
Uh, I say it's too soon to tell. I think that after 9/11, uh, the Americans had to pursue Al Qaeda to Afghanistan, where they were headquartered. Again, it was a global group that Al Qaeda had followers in many, many countries. Uh, the attacks of 9/11 were planned in Hamburg. They weren't planned in Afghanistan or in Pakistan. But the leadership was headquartered in Afghanistan. And when the Taliban refused to turn them over, the United States, I think, had to act. Uh, we know now, but we could have guessed then, that Al Qaeda was planning more attacks, and that there was a struggle within the leadership as to whether or not they should mount attacks that were not as spectacular as 9/11. And some of the plans presented to Osama bin Laden, he brushed off as being too insignificant. He wanted something more dramatic and eye-catching. So I think that was a necessity. All right, now you're there, and you have flushed uh, bin Laden out of Afghanistan. Uh, you have defeated the Taliban, who were his allies and protectors. Uh, do you withdraw? Well, not if you want to keep the country free of Al Qaeda, because as soon as you withdraw, they surge back in. So you have to have some kind of presence. What does that presence look like? I think it took the Americans about 20 years to figure out how to do that, how to provide logistical support, intelligence, a steady stream of war material, uh, air power, uh, targeting by drones to supplement what the Afghan army could do. They couldn't do all that by themselves, but they could do a lot, and they do a lot on the ground that the Americans couldn't do. So after quite some struggle, uh, I think we finally found our way to about the right set of tactics. A light footprint, 2,500, 3,500, maybe 4,000 troops. Rather little risk to American troops. We lost less than 25 soldiers a year for the last 5 years. Some years 17, 18 soldiers. Now that's a loss of life. That's a tragic loss of those families. But it's not the sort of casualties that you saw uh, in Iraq or in Vietnam and other places where you had a larger footprint. So Whether or not it was worth it to stay 20 years probably depends on whether or not you think it ought to have taken 20 years for us to figure this out. And if, having figured it out, we now have precipitously withdrawn, then you might say it wasn't worth it. However, that doesn't really validate the withdrawal. If you've made the earlier effort irrelevant by taking a decision that undermines that effort, you can hardly say that it was the people who came before you's fault. You have made their sacrifice pointless by your own decisions. There's a very well-known fallacy in rational thinking called the fallacy of sunk cost. It's when you start in a project that has a $10 million price tag and the builder comes to you and says, well, now it's going to cost 20 million. And you say, well, that's ridiculous. And they says, builder says, fine, I'll just leave it right now, half built. And you think, oh, well, gosh, I've got 10 million into this. Let's go ahead. And, all right, build it for 20. And the builder comes back in 6 months and says, it's going to cost 40. You say, wait a minute, this was supposed to cost 10. Now you said you could finish with 20. Well, he says, I can't. Do you want to finish or not? And you say, well, I've got 20 million into this. And it just goes on and on until you've lost all control of the cost of the project in terms of its benefits. Everybody knows this, and it's a cliche among economists and political scientists. But there's a reverse fallacy that no one discusses, and that's the fallacy of sunk cost. It's when costs have mounted so far beyond your expectations that you say, I just can't go on anymore. One more penny is too much. And probably one more penny isn't too much to salvage an entire project. It's when you lose perspective because you've lost patience and you just think, I can't stand this anymore. It's more the psychological pain than the actual accreting marginal cost. And I think that may be what's going on in Afghanistan.
Recently, President Biden said that the American aim in Afghanistan wasn't to build a nation. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, with all the supplements they have given to Afghanistan, was there ever an aim to build a nation? Was there ever an aim to empower the Afghani locals to stand up for themselves against terrorism?
Yeah, I know what the president, I think I know what the president means. It's not the reason we went into Afghanistan. But I don't think that states, great powers, are only allowed one aim. When my wife and I first met and we were single and I asked her to dinner, did I have in mind I was going to propose someday? Well, maybe not, but I certainly kept that door open. And as I got to know her, my aims changed, but they were multiple aims. If you buy an automobile, you say, well, I want to know what's the cost of it, what's the mileage, is it safe, does it have enough seats for my children? Why, if decisions like that are made on a multiple basis, do you think that warfare should just have one aim? I mean, it's absurd. The reason we went there was to prevent future attacks on the United States. That's right. Once we were there, was that our only reason for staying? No, we wanted to stabilize the society so that new groups wouldn't grow up. Was that stability motivated entirely by self-interest? No, we also believe in the rights of women. We believe in the rights of a free media. We believe in democracy. Did we go in for democracy? No. Did we stay for democracy? Not entirely. Was promoting democracy part of our war aim? Yes, it was. Of course it was. I was on a radio program in London years ago during the second Iraq War, and a caller rang in And he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, he said, does Professor Bobbitt think that the invasion of Iraq by Britain and the United States has anything to do with oil? And I said, well, I certainly hope so. And this shocked everyone. It wasn't that I thought we went into Iraq because we wanted to seize the country's mineral assets. It's because things that are in our economic and our allies' global economic self-interest are not irrelevant. And if they are positive to us, they'll keep us engaged and keep us focused on our security project. So I guess that's a long way of saying I see what the president means. Nation building is a century-long project. It's not the reason to go into anywhere, even, I don't know, Grenada or something. But it doesn't mean that we can be completely indifferent to the welfare of the societies that we find in the theater of war, or that we can check our morals and our ethical convictions at the border.
Most definitely. And we hope that you write for Jurist soon. We would really like to host you again.
If all of my contacts with jurists are as pleasant as this one, I certainly will. Thank you so much for taking this time with me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed. And we really look forward to more publications and more thoughts from your side.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Have a good evening now.